Good evening and welcome again to Inception Podcast. However, this is an Inception Podcast special. It's a new platform and a space to share. We will share profound and in-depth analysis of specialist topics, research, and personal individual interests. Inception Podcast and these specials, this new platform, can all be found on the Forbidden Knowledge News Network. Yes, guys, you know me and me autocue, getting old, where you will also find amazing, informative, and conscious expanding interviews by some amazing creators. Now I've done my official bit, let's get back to just being Gloria. Tonight's guest, Cory, who's going to introduce himself in a minute, is going to give us some highlights and examples of propaganda, because the title of this conversation tonight is Understanding Propaganda. So, Cory, could you just give us a brief intro to you and what you're about and your research?
Sure. Well, I was a police officer from 2005 till 2014. I was a crime scene investigator. Once I left that, I went out to Colorado, got involved in the cannabis industry, and from there I became a freelance writer. And from there I got into podcasting, where I launched a podcast company back in 2016. And that's what I've been doing ever since. As far as research goes, my primary area of research is the Kennedy assassination. I'm probably one of the foremost experts in the world on the Kennedy assassination.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
And you know, when you start to research Kennedy, most of the problem with Kennedy is that most people don't realize that you really need to understand 100 years of world history to really understand Kennedy. And in going back through that historical record, I found that the single most, the key turning point for the 20th century was 1941 with the creation of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which really came from the Office of the Coordinator of Information, which was Bill Donovan. Bill Donovan is the father of American intelligence. Mm-hmm. And it was basically that era of 41 to 45 that I really became just completely enthralled with. And it's not possible to understand propaganda, and it's not possible to understand World War II unless you understand the symbiosis and how American propaganda came to be. And so really the study of propaganda in World War II is really the study of World War II as a whole, because nothing we've ever been taught about World War II is true.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah, I don't know the complete truth. It's not been my field. As you know, we all go down our journeys. However, I want to kick this conversation off. I've got my little sticky note here, my auto cue, so I can sound really good, because Cory's going to come out with some terminologies, and I'm not looking stupid, guys. You know me. I'm standing in my own power tonight. So basically, adjusting aside, my understanding of propaganda is information especially used to promote political or to cause or enforce a point of view. Am I sort of on the right track there?
Absolutely, but I would give it a more broad definition, that propaganda really is information used to alter the way people think, feel, and act. Yeah. Because propaganda, we not only see coming from the government, but we see propaganda coming from businesses who want to sell you their product, right? Yeah. Like every McDonald's commercial has propaganda in it. Pretty much every advertisement that you'll ever see has some level of propaganda in it, because it's attempting to alter the way that you think or feel about something.
Yeah.
The government just made a science of it. That's where the difference between the government and the private sector is, as far as propaganda goes, is that with the private sector, they're just trying to make a buck, right? But with the government propaganda, they're trying to maintain an entire society.
Okay.
And, you know, they could never defeat us. If it was us versus the government, you know, it's a 300-1 loss on their part, but they can recruit people to their ideologies and to what they're doing through promotion of, for the most part, outright falsehoods.
Why I find this interesting, because part of my past career, I worked with groups of people in areas of serious crime, but my job in the counseling aspect was to, how can I put this, deconstruct what we'd call the Stockholm syndrome,
Mhm.
the beliefs, and for me, how you're talking now, it's very similar. I've had an awareness of what you call propaganda years ago, and I used to call it actually subliminal messages. However, I have aware of, it's like, for me, I found it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's like an octopus with tentacles in everything. And each one has a mirror on to reflect it. And it's like a hypnotic, breaking down. And it would be, for example, especially in the field that I worked in, you will obey. If you do not obey, there is a consequence of it, even if the command is illogical, irrational, and downright dangerous. So I want to go deeper into what propaganda does, and then hopefully you'll give us some real good examples. And I've seen it on the frontline work used to human beings will sit there and will just say, yes, that's fine. Yes, okay, I must do this. And then obviously from my point of view, before I was trained, I was like, why don't you see it? However, this is very, and I agree with you, it's historically entrenched. It's so entrenched to start to identify. I think I only identified it due to the career that I was in. So I was working on the victims of crime, so to speak, as well as working with perpetrators. They would tell me how they manipulated a situation. So could you take it deeper, the propaganda itself, and give us some really, if you can,
Sure.
Easy question, Cory. Easy question.
So let's go back to 1942, Hollywood. Director Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder was recruited to make a film because at the time in the 1940s, we'd only been out of World War I for, 15, 20 years. Nobody wanted to go back in. It was something like 91% of the country was against getting into World War II. So they recruit Billy Wilder. He makes a documentary called Why We Fight. And basically after that movie was released, the numbers inverted and it went to 90-something% wanted to join the war effort. It was really exploitative in as far as portraying every soldier as equal. Doesn't matter if you're a lawyer or somebody who mops the floor, you're all one with this unit, with the United States Army. We have to protect the world. I mean, all the stuff that you would imagine would be in that film was in that film. And you have to think, going back to 1942, people did not understand the concept of propaganda. They never would think that the government would just lie right to their face, right? And so you had a lot of this persuasion slogan type propaganda that came out. And probably the biggest tool in reference to propaganda in that era, on the American side here domestically, was the propaganda posters that were everywhere with Uncle Sam on it. And, it was funny because racism seemed to be okay back then. And so the pictures, the posters that had the Japanese on it all had like stereotypical what Japanese cartoons would look like. And, there was a series of short animated films with, what was his name? Sergeant Snafu, I believe, was the character's name in the propaganda. And he was like a bumbling idiot, right? But all these different propaganda films were based with him as the central character. And that really got people wanting to put in what their civic duty was. One thing about propaganda in World War II was that it convinced you that it was your duty to go and die for us over in, like, you have to do this. It's very much akin to what they're doing with the VAXX propaganda today. You got your duty. It's your civic duty. You need to go out and do this, so we see the same script being used over and over and over again. And that's something else that people need to realize about propaganda. The mind, in as far as how we interpret information, only works one way. So there's only one script for propaganda. There will not be a propaganda 2.0, and this is now how we do propaganda. The mind only works one way, therefore propaganda can only be administered one way. And that's why when this whole new recent pandemic broke out, I called BS on day one, because I was seeing the patterns of propaganda that were telling me this is all bullshit. And pretty much every prediction I made within that first couple of weeks has just been totally true. Because when you come to understand the patterns of propaganda, you really can get a firmer grasp on what's going on in the world.
I mean, I didn't grasp it all, but I mean, I did. If we go back to 9/11, I got that one. Every Amber Alert, Red Alert, I got that one. And then when that come along, somehow, even though you said the mind is programmed in historically to propaganda, it seems, I don't know how to put this, when you've had a sort of like, you've taken on enough understanding of this propaganda control, and there has been enough movies out there that millions have watched, that then you actually know what's coming. Does that sound right? This will happen because you think they repeat the same thing, slightly different topic or agenda, but you're seeing exactly the same thing happening. We know it's going to go A, B, C, D, E, boom, and then there we are.
The biggest problem we have today with what's going on now is that we have, on a scale we've never seen before, we have independent agencies completely captured by people with an agenda. I'm about to do a show coming up on understanding propaganda soon on the American Medical Association, who is without doubt a completely captured institution. The level of support from supposed independent doctors and organizations that have undoubtedly been captured, they give support to the propaganda, right? Previous times in the past, propaganda has been attempted without support and has failed, right? So if they spread 10 rumors or launch 10 propaganda campaigns, 9 of them will probably fail intentionally, not intentionally, but they know.
But you need one.
You only need one.
Can I just take it back on what you just stated before? I mean, when you said this is the biggest, and I would have said one. I agree with you. One highlights to me that was like a test run. Like we got most of the world last time, and that was the Iraq War. Okay, weapons of mass destruction. The propaganda went out. This is happening. We've got to do this, and the whole world was watching this. Yeah, and for me personally, at the moment, I see, well, that was a larger scale experiment. I think the propaganda war's been going on individually, different countries experimenting. How does it work? Testing, doing the blind experiments, doing this. But when the Iraq war come, and it was because I had a family member there who come back and told me it's not what everyone's saying on the news here in the UK, but then later on it came out, it was all total lies. However, they pulled it off. So I think for me, that was a key one where they could control nearly globally, as with 9/11, 2 big projects there. And I think they said, okay, we're ready. And a lot of us recognized it this time around, if that makes sense.
Yes, but I would take their experimentation with propaganda really back to the World War II era. And when you see the results, I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about the propaganda of World War II because it gets into some extremely sensitive subjects. But
well, you can go as far as, I mean, I don't like to censor anything. I am fully aware that there was one party funding both sides. I'm aware of that.
Right. But that's a little bit off topic. Okay. Fundamentally, the entirety of the Holocaust is complete and total nonsense. Pure fiction, like all the things that we've been taught since 1945, actually not even 1945, when you really start to dig into the history. The propaganda of World War II kind of like went to bed after the war and was not really revived until the 1970s. Okay. If you try to find a reference to the Holocaust before 1975, you're never going to find one because it didn't exist until then. Every single aspect that is claimed about that particular era of history is a blatant I would say a pre-war forgery. But when you get into Nuremberg really is just a collection of post-war forgeries. They started to lay all the groundwork for all the things we've come to know about that era going back to 1941. And really, if you wanted to dig deep into the historical record of World War I, you can find references to things like gas chambers and whatnot in the World War I literature, but we all know that they did not have those kind of things in World War I.
No.
They didn't have them in World War II either, but the propaganda stuck. I did like a 3 or 4 hour presentation on specifically the propaganda of World War II. Mm-hmm. And when you really come to understand like the foundations that they laid during the war and the impact that it's had on our understanding of world history, mm-hmm. It's like, holy shit. They took 4 years to plan out a story mm-hmm. that didn't even pick up or catch on until 1975. So it's insane how propaganda works and can be put aside until it's later needed, and then it can be recalled on as the historic record. It's really crazy. When you get into the actual study of propaganda, these guys shape everything they do. They have PhD psychologists coming in to help this stuff. It's not a bunch of idiots in a room,
As I said, I have a limited understanding because it's not been my field with the propaganda historically, apart from the Iraq War, 9/11, and some odd, especially the terror alert things as well. I know in this country, every time one come up, we went, here we go again, and it never panned out. It just never panned out because no one raised up in fear anymore. I think what they'd done. I don't know. Is that relevant? Over the years, they've done so many false alarms that people in the end are going, well, I don't give a shit no more. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. They got fed up because it was constant terror alerts or this alert or, we're going to have bird flu and then we got mad cow disease. And I don't know about America, but I know in this country, people got fed up with it. And we're going around and saying, you're going to die. So we can't live like this. So I don't know what it's like there. So you can see this, but I can see the propaganda. One of the core tentacles on this octopus for me is how it was an inertia of fear, building up the fear, be on alert, all the way back. You go back further than I, not because you're older than I. You could be older than I, and you're looking good at that age with your C60 that Chris, I am, know. However, coming from my area of interest, I can see how it was a shot of fear, cause it, reaction, solution, and off it goes until we get the biggest one ever. How do you feel about that? Fear's component part to the propaganda, because without fear, you can't control, can you?
Correct. Fear is the necessary ingredient. And there's always something to be afraid of. My friend Charlie Robinson just wrote a new book on the hypocrisy of the media and scare tactics. And in it, he has a list of all the things we're supposed to be afraid of year by year. Yeah. It's hilarious. It's really hilarious.
Yeah.
Because another thing that you look at when you look at that list, about a third of it is viral in nature, whether they're talking about like the measles or something else.
Invisible.
Yeah, you hit on something extremely important. The threat has to be invisible. You can't see it, because if you can see it, you can target it and you can eliminate it. But if you can't see it, they're not being able to see it. Like that's the thing with like the global warming thing. That's the biggest bullshit of them all.
Oh God. I know. Everyone's getting censored if they say it's too hot or too cold or something. Censored. You're censored. Now,
right? It's ridiculous. I live in a place where the climate changes 4 times a year. Like the whole climate change thing is complete and utter nonsense. And the propaganda behind the climate change has been like incessant for years. No one can explain to me why the fuck we're not worried about the ozone anymore.
Yeah.
Did it just fix itself all of a sudden? Give me a break.
And also, can I add to that? I don't want to digress, but if they're so concerned, if it's so true, then why are they firing into space in our atmosphere, all these chemicals and whatever they're doing up there? They're just firing them out and they're protecting our space, but they're doing something out there. So it's irrational. A lot of this I see as irrational. You must do this. It's illogical and irrational. We will stay on climate change for a bit. You can't do the whole program of that is to stop you driving, to stop you flying, stop you going anywhere. You can't use, you get all the smart meters in the home. You can't use too much electricity. So let's just fucking freeze you to death if you're elderly, all right? You can't do. But at the same time, they're firing and they're doing chemtrailing. Industry is still powerfully polluting the atmosphere, but the human being that's been here, let's not argue, Cory, how long we've been here. It could be billions or zillions of years, who knows? That's irrelevant. The planet survived. It's programmed to survive its seasons, and when we piss it off, it gives us an earthquake or an eruption. So for me, it's like, even when this one come out in 2020, this false alarm, I'm already thinking the next one, and it's got, because they've spoken about it, like you said, in the past. So you can see their pattern. You don't have to be an oracle or a medium to know what they're going to do next. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. The problem is, though, we have people being born every day, and every day you have more and more people being indoctrinated by the media and by mainstream sources. And as we're seeing now, they're targeting the education system.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. That's how you start a narrative. So one of the big aspects in Kennedy that people will try to argue with me over is that the building in which Oswald worked, well, he never worked there, but that's a whole nother story. That building, the Texas School Book Depository, was a CIA front company. All the other companies in that building were CIA publishing companies. Because do you really believe that the CIA or MI6 or whatever the organization is in that country, would they allow the printing of textbooks and the narrative to just anybody? Absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not. Intelligence controls the textbook industry in the world. And so, it becomes pretty obvious to me that the methods of propaganda that they use to try to pull people in they come from so many sources and so many wide reaching areas, the media, school textbooks. Every single area of our life has been completely saturated with indoctrination in one way or another.
And generationally, I've got to say, I've got 6 children. I know I don't look like I have, but I have. And on my youngest one, who's now 20, I'm taking them through the system. My children, the youngest one, was still learning the same curriculum as I learned at school. They were learning World War II, and no update science, no quantum physics, no nothing. But it was set. It was set, and what you had to do. And obviously, the younger generation now, there are many that is switched off. I know my children were switched off, and my children would say, and they would have a discussion with their tutor. Well, that's not right. Well, if you want to pass, you just tick it, answer the question. Just answer the question. That was it. Until the last 2 children at school who did succeed, I said, I don't care about your grades. You need to speak your truth. If it doesn't resonate and you want to look at it from a different perspective, go and do it. So I do see a lot of young people that were in the system in the UK. I don't know about America. And they've got alternative views. And when they get their alternative views from the propaganda, then they're kicked out of the education system. Then they're kicked out and they're diagnosed as ADHD, autistic, or whatever label, or under youth offending. They're a danger to society because they're not conforming. So I do agree with you. Them tentacles are like, so we would say education system, religious system, political system, pharmaceutical system. Cory, tell me, from your truth, who's behind all this? A lot of them have got to be dead by now, haven't they, since World War I?
Here's the thing. Here's the problem. The people if we're talking about specific things, or if we're talking about, the world as a whole, it really kind of always filters back to the same group, and the same group think multi-generationally.
Okay.
They don't care if they achieve their ends this generation, as long as it happens in the future. And so I think I'm trying to think of a good example of this. So let's take God. Every example I think of is just not completely accurate. Well, let me change it up just a little bit.
Okay.
So if you want a plan to take over the world, let's say you had a plan to take over the world. Is it theoretically possible to get large segments of the population to go along with you in a short period of time?
No, it's not.
Look how they're accelerating their plans with what's going on now, and look how much pushback it causes. If you really want to subjugate a society, you need to do it over 100 years or more.
Yeah.
And so the people who plan this thing, who plan everything, I'm going to tell you this right now, whether you're talking about Kennedy or any of the assassinations in America, Martin Luther King, 9/11, the London bombings and the Paris shootings, all that. These are all done by the same group of people. Okay. And they do their entire MO is to cause short-term chaos, which creates long-term policy. And that's exactly what 9/11 did. That's what I'm sure the London bombings and the Paris shootings did. It definitely, after Kennedy, there were a lot of changes to American policy after Kennedy was killed. But the people who we're up against are legitimately long-term multi-generational thinkers. And so when, like with the pandemic right now, the whole thing is falling apart. They know it's BS.
Yes, it is falling apart. Yes.
Right. And they know it's all BS, but it doesn't really matter because the disruption that they've caused already had the effects on the economy that they wanted. Yeah. It's had the effect on employment and people's mindset that they wanted. Yeah. And even when you have the sacrificial lambs, people like Fauci and all these other people who are stepping down in Austria and New Zealand and whatnot for corruption, it doesn't matter if they get thrown to the wolves and end up in prison because the long-term plan is still in place. Absolutely. And like I said, these people think multi-generationally. They don't care if they fail, they're not going to quit. It's going to keep going on, So even if we win a revolution,
I've always wondered, and I'd love your take on this because it still falls under the control factor, whether you call it propaganda, Stockholm Syndrome, whatever you want to call it, any label, is I'm old enough. I was not in World War II, not that old, but obviously I'm aware enough that when World War II ended, and we were shown here in the UK these videos of these atrocities and the experiments and all this horrific stuff going on. I became aware later on and in life where I really realized something wasn't right about World War II, even at a young age, is that all the scientists, the neuroscientists, the pharmacists, every one of them was shipped out of and sent to your country and then took over your country. So who won what? Who won what?
Okay.
And I kept saying, we won the war? What do you mean? That was a propaganda big time for me, because how could you say you won the war when you took the instigators and the controllers from one geographical, let's do some geographical profiling here, this in there, and you go and plonk them in the United States of America. That didn't.
So in reference to that, I'm going to straight up tell you that the Nazis did not lose World War II. The Germans lost, but the Nazis did not.
That's what I'm saying. It was obvious.
So yes. So it was obvious, but I never really understood the details until much later. But the reality is you get towards the end of 1943, early 1944, a year before the war was lost. Reinhard Gehlen, who was Hitler's spy master, he was his top general in the German army. He knew the fucking war was lost. And so what he did was he ended up, by the end of the war, he had cut a deal with Allen Dulles and the OSS and Ben-Gurion. And fundamentally, what he had done, knowing the war was going to be lost, he took all of Germany's intelligence and he spread it out and literally had it buried by his men all over Europe. So he goes to the end of the World War II. He's arrested. He's in a camp and he brings himself forward and says, "Hey, I'm Reinhard Gehlen. Let's talk." He spends a month with Dulles and Donovan working out a deal. And fundamentally, by the end of the war, they cut a deal which involved the funneling of probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 Nazis out of Europe through Africa into South America through what they call the rat lines. So basically, as we're fucking storming the beaches in Normandy, we're funneling the Nazis out the back door to South America.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was conspiracy for many years, but it's not. And this
it's not now. No.
It was the precursor to paperclip, which was the scientists, because the scientists were not the first to go. No. The first to go were the generals. Yeah. And so basically in the US, you already had like the PWE in Britain, and I don't know if you had MI5 or any of that stuff yet. I'm not sure about British intelligence, but at the end of 1945, you had the OSS was dissolved, and the CIA didn't come around until like May of 47. So you have this like 2-year gap where people are like, well, there was no CIA, there was no OSS. No. What exactly hell happened here? Well, for those 2 years, Reinhard Gehlen and his Nazi generals were down in South America training the next generation of intelligence officers. And then from there, to make a long story really short, Reinhard Gehlen and his plans that he had developed while the war was still going on, he basically ended up coming up with the design and infrastructure of NATO and the original 17 intelligence agencies, which all launched in 1947. Yeah. All in 1947. This was all the work of the Nazis. This was the work of Reinhard Gehlen and his cabal that he had with the then CIA, and what would soon be the Mossad. And fundamentally, the cabal that is doing this to us, has done all this stuff to us, killed Kennedy, everything since has been this kind of cabal of the remnants of the Nazis, which was called the Gehlen Organization, but you don't really ever hear about them. They kind of disappear once the 70s roll around, but did they really disappear? No. They didn't really disappear. But you have them, you have the Mossad, and you have the CIA. And then later, fast forward to like the 70s, then you have the Saudis get in the mix, because what the Saudis do with the oil embargo, right? They were like, well, we want in, and we want in now. And so in order to end and prevent oil embargoes from the Saudis, they pulled the Saudis into the intelligence circle, and they formed in 1979 what's called the Safari Club. And that Safari Club, that structure that was formed in 79 is pretty much they pretty much set the foundation for the cabal that's running the world today, which Israel is at the top of, and the CIA and MI6 are in the mix with also. But make no mistake about it, the world intelligence agencies take their orders from Israel and Tel Aviv. Okay. That's a fact. Okay. So, but they've done a really good job of hiding that from the world.
I mean, for me, I do have a limited understanding, and obviously, you know, we all know if we ever raise the word Israel up, then we're condemned as anti-Semitic, and you're not allowed to question. Mind you, today we're not allowed to even question a free choice or free will. So really, it was just the beginning. But look, so coming from that, another tentacle, like I said to you, one of them is the fear. Another tentacle that's in that is where the free choice is slowly eroded and taken away. So we have the fear tentacle. It's free choice. I have never, ever, normally I've understood how propaganda works is you can't force someone to do something, you have to get them to comply. And from my understanding, my limited understanding is, if you can use the word brainwash, you can use the Stockholm Syndrome. If you get them to believe there isn't another choice, they will make the choice that you chose for them, willingly giving up the free will. So I can see also with the input one tentacle with the fear, I can see the total erosion for not everybody, because people have woken up. People don't realize there's another choice, and they're basically agreeing to die, and they have no comprehension. The cognitive dissonance is gone, everything's gone, and I think that's another major weapon within the octopus. I call it the octopus, that also needs to address and identify. A human being has a free choice. But human beings today, in their millions, have given up free choice, freedom. How did that happen? How did they catch that one?
Well, I think especially in what's going on today with the pandemic and the VA double X, the biggest thing I think that they are the psychological mechanisms that they're playing on are, number one, the herd mentality. Yeah. Everybody's doing it. So first off, I think they're lying about the vax numbers. Like they said that
everyone knows that.
Right. So
we have had it in UK. Just periodically, they've had to admit, never got into trouble. Yeah, we added all. Like, for example, they said, I don't know when they said it. They were questioned, where's all the deaths of the flu? And I followed that. And then someone said the flu's disappeared, and everyone sort of went, "Oh, fuck off now! Now you're getting stupid." Yeah, we did add that. If you had a car accident, you died of COVID, and people were in. Everything was COVID, and then we had families here who died of cancer, heart attack, whatever, Trevor, and the families were then uprising because they put on the deaths of it. Died of COVID. They didn't. They died of natural causes. So. We're aware, and in the UK, maybe not everyone's aware, but the figures are not what they've shown yet.
I mean, when you really dig into human psychology, we're pretty much all a bunch of big children walking around. I've kind of concluded there are no adults in the world. We're really just a whole bunch of big children, and so it's really easy to play on those psychological, predispositions. Yeah. We all want to be part of the group. None of us want to stand out unless we really want to stand out, right? And then those people are excised from the group, right? But for the most part, we all want to just get along with everyone else and go along with the herd, because that's kind of, that's just how society kind of operates. And we haven't lived in an era that has just been so overwhelmingly propagandized, right? Because like in the 40s, in order to be propagandized, you had to read the newspaper, right? So here, you can't walk down the street without seeing a billboard that says "Get the vax." It's disgusting. The amount of outside pressure on the individual to conform is like absolutely unbelievable. And I've been kind of a rebel since I was like a young teenager. I got grounded by my parents because when I was 12 years old, I wrote to this punk rocker named Gigi Allen. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
No.
He used to eat his own shit on stage. It was really
No, shut up.
But I got grounded at 12 years old for writing to him when he was in prison, right? So I've been kind of anti-society since the beginning. Yeah. So when I start seeing this stuff and the walls start closing in, my first knee-jerk reaction is to blow those walls up, not conform with them, So.
I mean, I come from I never conformed. I come into here differently, and I never fitted in. And I always got into trouble because, well, you may know, I got diagnosed with schizophrenia because I didn't fit in, because I was, anyway, that's irrelevant to the thing tonight, but I do understand that. However, I want to go a bit deeper into, for the audience that are like myself, you're the expert on understanding propaganda. No pressure here, by the way, Cory, no pressure. I'm only going to get the best on the podcast. Can you give us some examples, more for the layman, for us, in how it works? My limited understanding is they cause a problem, and then they watch the reaction or something like that, and then they bring in a solution. But in fact, there was never a problem in the first place. So does that resonate with you? How do they do it?
Yeah, that's a very specific example. Like what's going on with this pandemic. There was no pandemic, yet the propaganda has made it seem like there is, but that's not always how propaganda operates. So you got to think after 9/11, let's say between 9/11 and 2003, when we actually invaded Iraq, okay, the propaganda was meant, it was a different kind of propaganda. It was meant to steer your personal ideology in a certain direction to get behind the war, right? Yeah. Kind of like what they did with that with the Why We Fight film in World War II, right? So that movie came out, and boom, overnight, everyone wanted to go to war. Yeah. That was kind of the theme of the propaganda post 9/11. It was, we got to get in there because we have to prevent these terror attacks, and we know who did it. We got to go. And every single bit was about trying to convince people that we needed to do a certain action. Yeah. The current propaganda, man, here's the thing. Like, for someone like me who understands propaganda, I can go through it and be like, what a bunch of amateurs. But to the 99% of the world, it's like expert level propaganda.
Yeah.
You know, and they're really big on slogans, 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
Right. And then vaccines are safe and effective.
Yeah.
Right. So they have all these little slogans, and those slogans get stuck in your head like a jingle on a jingle on an advertisement. Right.
Yeah. And
so after a while of just hearing them slogans, your subconscious believes it, whether you consciously believe it or not.
Okay.
No.
So how do you, okay. We've had some really good deep examples about it. So how do we, my favorite, I use it because I come from criminology, deconstruct. How do we deconstruct it? I mean, for those that, many now are what we say waking up now. Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, I've had quite a few friends that got the you-know-what and have become seriously ill afterwards, or then they've been tested and said, go and lock yourself up, you've got it again. And they're going, well, why the hell did I have it? And I said, well, that's what you need to think about. So if you want to go and have a nice booster, think about that. And I'm ill. And so it is happening. It's falling apart. It's all fractalizing under their noses. However, how can we deconstruct this? For those just coming in, I will never be able to fly again the way things going or go anywhere. I don't care. Fine. It's good. It's okay. It's not the end of my life. It doesn't define me if I can't fly somewhere or, go in a nightclub. In the UK, we're quite free at the moment. We can go anywhere and do anything. Yeah. It's just, and then you just got to wear a mask if you go into the national health hospitals. At the moment, they're waiting to see, because the country come up in its millions and already hit Parliament. We won't have a COVID passport, and they had to agree because too many hundreds of thousands stood up and signed the petition. So, but that's not going to stop them. We know that. So I'm just saying, for now, how can we deconstruct this now? How can we reverse or improve or change the timeline, Cory? If we stay on the timeline that they want, we all know what's going to happen. I'd rather a spaceship took me off the planet. Thank you very much. However, I spoke to someone in Canada who's on my show, and I can't believe what's going on in Canada. I can't believe, and it replicates Nazi Germany, the war. It's like 1 minute it was evil and now you're doing it. And so how do we deconstruct it? Because what the public, because they're so stuck to the TV, I say don't watch your TV, don't pick up a newspaper, go look for alternative news and make a free decision, use discernment. But how can we, likes of yourself and Chris and everyone, we're aware what's going on in other countries. How can we deconstruct this? How can we shift this timeline coming from our human approach? How can we do it?
That's a tough one, because most people don't recognize when they're being propagandized in the first place.
Yeah.
Most people, I think, believe that the news doesn't outright lie to you, and the bottom line is there are two. And once the message passes from the news to a social circle, and then you have social circles engaging in the desired behavior, that's when you start to get into the deep psychology of like a Lord of the Flies kind of shit,
Yeah.
It really is up to the individual to seek out answers, right? But the bottom line is, most people won't seek out answers to questions they don't know exist, right? And so I don't have an answer to you. Fundamentally, like I think that we're long past due for extinction as on a human race scale.
I think
the reality is,
I wouldn't mind a comet coming down now. I have no issue. Bring it on, planet, whatever, Boris. I don't fear death, basically. However, my truth is we have free choice and we create our reality. It's just my truth. So I will never give up the search for, put it this way. I know many people, by connecting, me coming on the Forbidden Knowledge News Network first, and they know me, and then they're hitting the Forbidden Knowledge News Network. They're listening to other shows like I do, which normally they wouldn't, because they're fixated on and they are deconstructing, because I'm hearing it. They're questioning it, like, why did I do that? And I heard someone say the other in one of these countries that is literally locked down. I broke the law last night. I went off down to our friends and we had dinner together. And I'm hearing it more and more and more and more. But however, Cory, I've got to tell you, in the UK, in the first lockdown, no one stopped going anywhere. No one. So not everyone has been conformed. They wouldn't. I think it depends what freedoms you're being asked to give up. I think there is a way to deconstruct this and change the timelines. But however, the other side has realized this. If you separate families, you can't go near your granny. That's not going to work. They're going to rebel. But for me, and I may be wrong, the whole point of all of this wasn't to stop Gloria flying, wasn't to stop Gloria hugging her children. It was, I call it a bioweapon. For me, the whole point of the past 2 years is the pharmaceutical company and what's going on there. I heard today on Russell Brand did a special release today. He brought out the evidence of one of the companies, I won't name because I'm not getting sued. I haven't got anything anyway. It's been whistleblowed out. They're making like 400, they put the price up in America, not UK. They're putting up the price of the medicines that you people have paid for. Yeah, your government has done, go do testing, to something like 400%. So they're now getting 400% profit off the Americans. Russell Brand, he did a thing on YouTube today. I was blown away. Right in front of everybody's eyes, Cory. So for me, why has this happened? And how can we start to deconstruct it? Well, I think you've already answered it at the beginning. You're doing a podcast on the pharmaceutical companies, aren't you? You're doing it. To me, that if you find the cause, what is their outcome? Well, I think for me personally, the outcome.
Another thing you have to think of is like every single one of these incidents that have happened throughout history, particularly whether you're talking about Kennedy or Martin Luther King or 9/11, there's never just one reason why the thing happened. There's always multiple reasons. There might be one underlying reason. Like with Kennedy, the underlying reason that Kennedy was killed was over the Dimona nuclear reactor being built in Israel. Yeah. That was why Kennedy was killed. That was number one. But underneath that, you can find reasoning in a dozen different places from people who are involved. So it's the same thing with all these other events. And so when it comes to what's going on today, is the pharmaceutical aspect of it one of the primary aspects? Absolutely. The financial.
I just tried to answer the question somehow. You know, we said it's difficult, but we're trying to open it up.
There is most certainly 100% an occult aspect to what's going on.
Okay.
And the deaths of people dying is part of the plan. Absolutely. Without question. Depopulation, but depopulation for what purpose? It's not just depopulation for it's the what purpose. And that's where people who are really deep down the rabbit hole will perhaps argue over. But for me, it all goes back to one thing. I mean, for me, this is all about the Greater Israel Project. And if you study the Greater Israel Project and you study papers like by Oded Yanon, like a strategy for Israel in the 1980s, these motherfuckers openly write about this stuff. Like none of the stuff that's going on today is secret. You can find out the true reasons for it by going back and reading through history. And, let's go back to World War II.
Okay.
World War II. Everyone starts the World War II conversation at Hitler hated Jews and he wanted to kill them all. That's where the story starts, right? No one ever digs into the real realities of what brought about the Nazis. Why did they even come into existence in the first place? Why was that ideology so strong? Why, nobody ever goes back and digs into the fact that there has been 100% since 1895 a Zionist conspiracy to take over the fucking world. And so when you start World War II, say you go back to like the beer hall putsch in like the 1918, let's say you start there. You still got 30 years or 20 years that of the story that has been left out. You know, nobody can understand what happened in all of the 20th century without understanding the birth of Zionism and people like Theodore Herzl and Chaim Weizmann and Ben Gurion and the people who are behind every horrific act on the planet and who have basically almost completed conquering the fucking world. But if you notice, all this stuff happening is only happening in the West. Yes. Only the West. Yes. It's not the East. No. And there's a very specific reason for that. It's because they can't conquer the East. They've conquered the West. They cannot conquer the East. And the orders that flow from the Jewish bankers at the top down through organizations like the Jewish Agency or the ADL, and then make their way to the Israeli government and then through the intelligence wing of the Mossad. I have no doubts the Mossad released, COVID-19, no doubts whatsoever, because we know that it was released in multiple places around the world simultaneously. Yeah. And you always need a patsy, right? China's the patsy in this one.
Always blame China. Always.
Because there'll never be any consequences. Never. There's never consequences for blaming them. And most people are so dumb, they'll just buy it. So
say, for example, you asked me the question earlier on. I'm going to say, so Cory, you want world domination. They want world domination. And what to get from that? How boring is that? Just for
they got a world of their own, and that's exactly what this is. This is I call it the global Jewish establishment, and I've really since completing my first phase of Kennedy research, I've really dug back into the history of Judaism and going back to like thousands BC and all this stuff. And the reality is, there has been a Jewish plot to take over the fucking world. In action since the first World Zionist Congress in 1897. Everything that we've known. I haven't been
unaware of this conversation. And for many years, this has always come up. It's always come up when I've studied, especially when I went in to study years ago, comparative religion. And it kept coming up and it kept coming up. And it always comes up. As I said, it's not my field of research, but I am aware of this. And Mossad, I am aware of that because I've had very close friends from the Islamic and Jewish community. They're not Zionists, by the way, or terrorists, and they don't agree with this policy. And so I have an awareness of that. But however, most people don't have this awareness of what's behind it. So for me and for anyone watching. And it's a very sensitive topic and not here to, offend anybody, but I feel we have a right that we can discuss this and respectfully put a point of view across. It may resonate with you. Go to the independent news outlets, go to podcasts, listen. If it doesn't resonate, turn it off, find the next one. Go and you have a choice. You have a choice here, and it's the most crucial time, I'd say, Cory, for people need to make the right choice. I think they are, and believe it or not, the ones making the greatest choice are the ones that have already been dubbed, and they felt the effects. They've woken up from it. What the fuck have I done? I still can't do this. I still can't do that, and I still can't. So that has backfired. That bit has backfired. Mm-hmm. That has.
When I was growing up, my mother used to say, if all your friends jumped off the Empire State Building, are you going to jump too?
Yeah, exactly.
And it was like, no, definitely not. But nowadays, it's like they want you to.
Yeah. And I raised my children to say, oh, my friends are doing that. And I used to say to my children, well, if your kids want to go and jump in front of a car, I'll go shoot someone, you're going to do it? No, don't be stupid, mother. I said, well, what are you doing? You're not sheep. Think for yourself. So for me, the future is bright. It is fractalizing. It's crashing down. We're seeing it everywhere. And I'm noticing there's more censoring on climate change than there is on this. I'm noticing, I don't watch TV. I don't listen to the news for years. However, I've noticed on social medias, people are saying, and I'm saying, where's the sticker? You're banned. Don't say that. But I'm seeing more. This is false information on spiritual posts, Cory.
Mm-hmm. So to really drive home the effects of propaganda, I really need to emphasize They just spent the last 2 fucking years convincing the world that people who are not sick can get you sick. That is straight out of Goebbels. In fact, I don't even know that Goebbels ever put out such blatant lies like that. Yeah. It is so absolutely ridiculous. And then all these people who are like, oh, you already had COVID, get the vaccine too. Yeah. I'm like, that is not how science has ever worked or has ever been taught to us. And like, when you ask these people to start to explain to me the science on how the vaccine works. Mm-hmm. And then you explain how when you're exposed to a virus in the wild, you're exposed to the whole thing, not just the 0.3%, which is the spike protein. Yeah. You know, it's like, Jesus Christ. They have done a good job in the last 2 years of rewriting science and rewriting history. And when you go through all of the 20th century, you'll find the vast majority of our history has been rewritten before it even got to the history books.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got around here, this is truthful experience. I know someone that had both, and she got a phone call while in my presence, Cory, and someone else said, oh, this test, I've spoken about the false positives test, yeah. I think they're just batched out, all positive, just to be batched out. And she's perfectly healthy. Nothing wrong with her, super duper. And someone phones that she was in the company the other day. Oh, I've tested positive. I've got no symptoms, but so the phone went down and she said to me, they've tested positive. I said, oh, and I said, I don't want to know. I just walk away. You want that reality, go do it. Anyway, then I get a text later on, a couple of hours later, I did a test, I'm positive. I can't breathe. I feel weird.
Psychosomatic.
Yes, and I'm going, it's a couple of hours. Let me tell you, Cory, at the end of 2019, before we end tonight, January 2020, I nearly died from this virus, yeah? And it took me 6 months to even walk a couple of feet on the recovery of it. And I still haven't recovered from it. I've still, my lungs, everything, the whole, and I had it. And when it hits you, any virus, when it hits you, it takes 14 days after. I know where I caught it because my daughter kept having kidney operations, and I was in an A&E, and there was a gentleman there coughing and spluttering at the Christmas or whether January. Anyway, they did put a mask on him because he was, you go like this. 14 days later, 7 to 14 days later, it incubates in the human and it will come out. Not 2 hours. You may get a faster acting. I'll give you 3 days then. Mm-hmm. Not 2 hours or 3 hours or 12 hours. And I thought, no. And so anyone that comes to me, I just explain this to them. You didn't have any illnesses. You get a test. You're now, you see this? I've got a packet here, Cory. Look, in England, do they do it in America? If you smoke, they've been doing it for years. They put nasty images and they're telling you psychosomatically, you're going to have all these diseases. Do you know what a lot of us do here in England? We do. Can you see that? We buy cases. That's my cannabis. I don't smoke cannabis. I don't, because I'm fully aware of the propaganda, the subliminal messages to program you in. So everything that we do. And before I end, I want to mention, please remind me the name. There's a film. Is it called White Moon? When the man put the glasses on, you know, your billboards in America.
Oh, They Live.
They Live. There you go. They Live. And I remember watching that years ago, Cory. Do you know how many people woke up from that film? So we can deconstruct it by having this conversation and sharing experiences about how others have become aware, what we need to do. Please keep doing what you're doing because it's amazing. And is there anything you want to add about propaganda before we end the podcast? It's been fantastic.
To really understand propaganda, you have to make it a study. I mean, you really need to. And that's why I started the Understanding Propaganda show, because no one's going to take the time. People are too busy, but you can sit down for an hour and listen to me read off the history. Like the first episode, I went through Goebbels. Second episode, I finished Goebbels. Third episode, I went through the OSS.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Fourth episode, I went through the HIV connection to COVID-19. Because that's a major propaganda there. We know where this thing came from. All right. We know where it came from. We know what comprises the inserts. We know all this stuff. And like the news is just ignoring it. So no, but like, if you want to understand the world around you, you have to understand propaganda.
And where can our audience connect with you?
You can find Understanding Propaganda at understandingpropaganda.com, or you can find my work on Kennedy at coryhughes.org.
That is wonderful. Cory, thank you so much for taking me down the rabbit hole to a field that I haven't researched, just a little bit of awareness. I've learned so much today, and I hope the audience has enjoyed the conversation. And I will see you guys for the next conversation, either on Inception Podcast or Inception Special. And it's goodbye for me. Cory, say goodbye.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, sweetie. Bye, guys.